All right, well, good morning. George is in the building, but I'm not sure where he is. He'll join us eventually. I'm Mary Hunter Maxwell, I'm George's wife, and I'm gonna talk today about the nurtured heart approach, which is a way of being with children. And I'm gonna get there by kind of a circuitous route, so I hope you'll follow along with me and give me some grace as the non-resident theologian in our house. I will do my best. But we'll start with a prayer. The Lord be with you. And let's say it together. Almighty God, to you all hearts are open, all desires known, and from you no secrets are hid. Cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of your Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love you and worthily magnify your holy name, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, there has been a lot going on in my brain this month. About 2 weeks ago, I left Atlanta with Lisa McNamara, our fearless director of children's ministries, and we attended the Mockingbird Conference in New York. And Mockingbird Ministries is something I really didn't know much about, but I have taken a deep dive into their way of thinking. And then you may know, George was out of town this last week, and so I had plenty of time to do lots of reading and thinking about all the things that we talked about at Mockingbird. And I also just completed the Nurtured Heart intensive training to be a trainer. So this is not a nurtured heart training. I'm not teaching you how to do it, but I want to talk about it in the context of what George has been talking about in Old Fashioned. So how do we know what we know? Some other things I've been thinking about, being a mom in May is really hard. There's so much going on. Being a parent in general is hard and joyful. I've been thinking about how language shapes us. I think that's part of the conversation of how we know what we know. Godly play, which I'm going to talk about at least a little bit, is all about language. How do we give children the Christian language so that they can make meaning in their lives? And when I think about language, I can never get away from telling the story of an immigrant who his parents had immigrated, I guess, and I'm not sure where exactly they came from, but I think it was Vietnam. And he was talking to his grandmother and said something like, "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if you hadn't left?" And there's no word for what would have been. There's no idea of what would have been in the language that they were speaking. And so he was trying to communicate that idea in English, which he had learned, and it just didn't compute. What would have been isn't part of the way that they know and they think. So I just put that out there for you to be thinking about. How does our language, the way we talk about things, shape what we know? I've also been thinking about the left brain and how George is really into the left brain, and that is not where I like to stay. So if I veer too far to the right brain, don't worry, he'll be back next week. I've been thinking about what bears good fruit in my life. What are we doing that's the right thing? And I've been thinking about nurtured heart, of course, but also in the context of who we are here. Nurtured heart is not a Christian approach. It's not coming out of our tradition in any way. But as I sat with the things I'd been learning at Mockingbird so intensely, and the things I was learning about nurtured heart so intensely, I couldn't help but put them together. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about this morning. And then somehow, in my preparation for this class, France just kept coming up. So we'll talk about France a little bit too. All right, so George has been talking a lot about head and heart, left brain, right brain, form, absence of form, I-it relationships and I-thou relationships. How do we know what we know? What kind of knowing are we engaged in? What kind of knowing do we need? And I studied French very briefly. I am not a French speaker in any way, but from my earliest high school experience, I was really captivated by the way that there were two words for to know in French. So there's, and I'm like my accent not good, connaître and savoir, to know, to know. And it opened up the world to me a little bit to think about you can know someone, and that's different. It's a whole different word in French than if you know something. And that's not as complicated as what George has been talking about, but it is, to me, an important starting place. It was an important starting place for me. I also do a lot of thinking about children. Y'all know that, I'm sure. And so that's going to come up in the way that children know and the way that we can learn to know better through children. All right. So this, yeah. I love this. This is so perfect to me. But this really helps me think about, we live in a world where nothing seems true. It is so hard to come to an agreement. And part of the reason we live in that world is because with our heads, with our knowing that is the knowing of fact, we want to question everything until we get to something we can prove. Now, questioning everything, I think, is a good idea because there's a lot in the world that doesn't work. But you do need to think about, or we need to think about, as Christians, as parents, as people who interact with each other and want to do that in a loving way, why? Why are we asking those questions? Are we asking those questions so that we can justify ourselves? Or are we asking those questions because we are curious and open and interested and think that pursuing those questions can help us make the world a better place? I would argue that children ask a lot of questions because they do really want to understand. They are curious. Alison Gopnik talks about children as explorers. They are constantly trying to find out why and what and how, and that's developmentally how their brains are wired. Adults lose some of that. We know that. And when we lose it, Gopnik calls the mode that we move into being exploiters. So children are explorers, and adults often fall into being exploiters of information, of the things that they take in, the ways that they're dealing with answers to questions. They're exploiting what they find to their own ends, which is very necessary to live in the world, right? George, I think, has done a good job of making that point over time. It's not that we're trying to get rid of either one. It's just that we want to think about both of them. So I know you've heard George talk about charitable reading, and I think charitable reading comes into play right here at this very moment. Why are we questioning? Why are we reading? When we talk about charitable reading, I think it's come up a fair amount around personal relationships, and that's important, and we'll kind of get to that. But I want to take a step back and say, the original idea of enacting charity with text, with what you read, came from an article that a professor wrote, and he was trying to figure out how to integrate Christian practices into the class that he was teaching about German literature. And he points out that we live in a world where we are rewarded and considered bright, quick, the best students, when we quickly point out what's wrong with what we read. When we're able to take something apart and do it fast And we are so good at that. I mean, we are good at that. And it's rewarded. But what David Smith says is that's really not the way to approach a text that could transform you. Something you've deconstructed can't transform you. It's not even there anymore. You've mastered it. You've conquered it. You made it yours. And in doing that, you lost a piece of it, okay? So what he says is that when we come to text, initially the scriptural text, but expanded beyond, a better posture is to be open. Not that you can't question, but that the questions are in pursuit of relationship with the text, in pursuit of transformation, in the knowledge that you actually don't have all the answers. And it leaves you a little less satisfied because you don't get that A+. I mean, I was an A+ deconstructor. I'm good at it. And it's so much easier than really engaging with something and staying with it and being changed by it, right? Okay, so this is a lot on charitable reading, but I think you can think about how that intellectual move can open you up to the possibility of reading people with charity, of being in a posture where you're open to transformation, not jumping into the fray and telling them how wrong they are right away. Okay, so that's an invitation to all of us, and a good move in the direction of nurtured heart, okay? So just let's think about using children and their approach and their curiosity as a window into some of what we might be able to do in a more mature Christian sense. All right, so appreciative inquiry is kind of another step along the way that I think is helpful for us as Christian people trying to live in the world. This is something that nonprofits and corporations use and can really help you make the move towards a charitable reading, looking at what is good. So it's sort of the next step. It's not just I'm open to it, it's I'm committed to the fact that there's something good here, and that's what I'm gonna focus on. Asking yourself, what is going right? And again, we're just so good at identifying what's going wrong. It's so much easier. It's easier to quantify. So, people talk about data-driven everything. Well, it's a lot easier to get data on what's going wrong than about data on what's going right. And then we start to value the things that we're measuring. So we constantly are being refocused on the negative. We're constantly being asked to shift our gaze away from all the things that are going right to the things that are going wrong. And it really doesn't help us that much, I would argue. So I would even take the next step. I told you I've been deep into this Mockingbird ministry. The next step of saying that this is really a good example of sin and the way sin acts in the world. Shifting us away from God and God's goodness towards the things that are wrong. Occupying our minds and our hearts with the things that are not of God. The world is constantly asking us to do that. And I think it doesn't help. And I think it's not our best move as Christians. And I think we know some things about what to do differently, but it's really hard. So this is, you can see it, I think. So the Mockingbird Ministries is what I want to talk about for just a minute, and then I promise I'm going to move on to Nurtured Heart. I thought the cartoon was funny because it says self-mockingbird, and then it's a picture of a mockingbird looking in the mirror and criticizing himself. And I think we do that a lot. There's a lot of self-criticism in the world, and especially in the world of parenting. But Mockingbird Ministries, their fundamental purpose is, they say, to sing the same old song. It's the song of Jesus. It's about law and gospel and God and Jesus. And so there are three things that are kind of bumping around in my mind, coming out of Mockingbird, scripturally grounded, all that, that I think help me think about Nurtured Heart in the context of a Christian life together. So the first thing is the law doesn't produce. What does that mean? That means that the rules that we have don't work. Not that they're not good, not that we shouldn't think about how we can be followers of the law, but they just on their own, they don't work. We can see that all around us. God gave Moses the 10 best ways, that's how we talk about it in Godly Play, as a gift to the people. They didn't know what to do or how to be. They needed something, and God, in God's infinite mercy and wisdom, having already delivered them out of Egypt, gave them the law to help them be the people God knew they could be, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it by themselves. We can't do it by ourselves. The second thing is, part of why we can't do it by ourselves is we're not as free as we think we are. So these are Mockingbird's three points. The law doesn't produce, we're not as free as we think we are. We are constantly being redirected away from God. I said that already. We're really impacted by what goes on around us. And you know that. You can see it happening, right? Happens with children in sort of a very obvious way, but it happens with all of us. We're not really making our own choices completely independent of the things and the culture around us. And so we fail. We don't love people the way we should. We make huge mistakes and small mistakes every day, all the time. And yet, point 3, God just loves us anyway. It's so frustrating. It's like the parable of the talents, or the workers in the vineyard. I mean, all of it. What? I worked hard, and yeah, I made some small mistakes, but they made really big mistakes, and you're telling me God loves them anyway, the same? And you can't even tell me what they did to deserve it? No, it's not about that. It's not about what you deserve. It's about God's grace that is given to us through Jesus. And in the Episcopal Church, we just don't talk about that very much because it feels a little icky. But I'm going to say, I think we need to hold on to that and really use it in the powerful ways that we can and have it help us be the people we want to be. All right. One thing I do want to say here. So in some of this swarm of information I've been consuming this week, somebody said that original sin, there are lots of ways to talk about original sin, but this I found very compelling, has to do with our getting caught up in thinking that we can bear the burden of our own belovedness. That we can come to that on our own. We can figure out that we're worthy on our own. This is a very popular thing we fall into, I think. We've kind of written a lot of sin out of the prayer book at this point. We're really good about kind of finding ways to say, we believe everybody's good, but we don't really talk about God sometimes. And I love this idea of when we try to take that on for ourselves, it's not gonna work. We have to invite God into that. And God's already there and already doing it. So What a waste. But of course, it's very hard. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Collect for Purity for a minute, because I promised John that's what I was going to talk about. And hopefully, I'm making a path here that's making some sense. It might not. That's okay. The Collect for Purity, like so much of what we pray and do, I would say, is aspirational. It falls under the category of, I will with God's help. And so I kind of broke it down, and I think it's a great thing that we say it every Sunday. Reminder, God is the source of everything. That's actually kind of easy to forget. Reminder, God already knows you, all of you. Like, you're not hiding the parts of yourself that you don't want God to see, that you can't do it. God already knows. A reminder, we do want to be perfect and worthy. We want to be in relationship, real relationship with God and each other, and we can't do it without God's help. And reminder, Jesus is our help, even if we're always forgetting. The help is there. Because I went to Sewanee and I listened to the History of English podcast, I was able to translate from Middle English this collect. I'm just kidding, it's really easy to do it, but I do both of those things. From the Cloud of Unknowing. Did you know, George, this is the Cloud of Unknowing? I was so impressed with this. Okay, so the Cloud of Unknowing, this contemplative treatise that's the foundation of much of Christian wisdom work, includes this collect. God, unto whom all hearts be open, and unto whom all will speak, and unto whom no private things hide. I beseech thee so for to cleanse the intent of my heart with the unspeakable gift of thy grace, that I may perfectly love thee and worthily praise thee. Amen. That's from the Cloud of Unknowing. So I found that to be interesting in my foray into grace, law, and gospel, that even this amazingly profound mystic was praying this prayer and tying it back to that idea of grace. Okay, so, do you think it's gonna, is this good news? Maybe, I don't know. We can't change, we're not in control, it all seems horrible. Jesus is there, but we don't really want to talk about it because it feels a little icky. Yeah, it's kind of hard. But I do think it's good news. It's not easy, but it's good. And it's especially good for parents. So this slide says, study finds every style of parenting produces disturbed, miserable adults. So in a sense, like maybe, yeah, right? Because it's not really about that. It's not about the parenting. Parenting is everywhere. There's like books and podcasts and all over the place. As I was kind of looking at stuff about parenting, I found, first of all, there's a show called The Parent Test, where people are testing out their parenting strategies and then getting voted off the island, basically. How horrifying is that? So, and some of the parenting styles that are bantered about on the internet, gentle parenting, acceptance parenting, traditional parenting, authoritative parenting, distracted parenting, attachment parenting, French parenting, playful parenting, gracious parenting, conditional parenting, laissez-faire parenting, natural parenting, and messy millennial parenting. Those are some of the choices. And the truth is that parenting advice, parenting, all of this like sense that if we know enough in our brains that we can produce people who aren't disturbed and miserable, like it's really just about saying it's your fault But that's okay because that means you're in control and you can fix it. And guess what? You're not and you can't. Again, is it good news? I don't know. Okay, so that takes us finally to nurtured heart. Nurtured heart, I haven't been doing for very long, and I absolutely don't think I'm all that good at it, but I do think it's compelling. And I think it's compelling because it's not a way of doing. It's not about scientific research and what the data shows, although there is some research to support it, but that's not really what it's about. It's a way of being. And in all of my years working with children and families, and all of the work I have done training teachers about how to be with children, there's one really horrible thing, and that is the only way any of the systems work is when you, as the parent or the adult, are ready to have a different way of being and knowing. It just doesn't, you can't just apply the rules that you learn in your head. You have to be in a particular kind of relationship. Not that this is the only way to do it, but that is what it takes. There has to be a kind of relationship. It's not about applying principles that you've learned. So nurtured heart is oriented towards building a known sense of your deep worth and value. And they talk about it, Howard Glasser is the man who started it. He talks about it in terms of greatness, but I think we could talk about it in terms of godness. Where do we see the aspects of God, what we know of God from our relationship built over time in community? Where are we seeing that in our children, and where are we showing them that that's what we value? The other thing about the nurtured heart approach that I love is it started initially as something to use with really intense children. And I was a really intense child, and so I know that intense children need more intensity. It needs to be matched. And the way they talk about intensity, though, is life force. Intensity is like, channeled appropriately, this incredible gift. It's not, it's not something to be subdued. It's something to be celebrated. And that makes me think of this, one of my favorite quotes of all time: "The glory of God is the human being fully alive." I think that's what nurtured heart is about. It's not about behavior. It's not about, it's not something that can be measured right in the moment, because sometimes, especially really intense children, but all of us, are always gonna make mistakes. There's always gonna be something, sometimes really big, sometimes really small, but there's always something. And so that's not what we need to worry about. What we need to worry about is how can we help ourselves, each other, and our children be fully alive? And I think nurtured heart is a path towards that. So now you're gonna get some pictures of the trip I took with Robert to Europe when he was little. And I wanna say that when Robert was a preschooler, I would have very confidently told you that I had such a good sense of the fact that I wasn't in control. I mean, I wasn't all that worried about bedtime. I wasn't measuring how much he ate. I knew I could not control him into being. I just knew it. He had to go spend the night with his dad sometimes. I wasn't in control, and that gave me so much freedom, and I was so proud of myself because all my friends are all worried all the time. Well, let me tell you, I was controlling a lot that I no longer control, and that's been hard. But I still think that it is helpful to remember that we're not in control. So that's just a quick sort of aside about this age group. Okay, so nurtured heart, now moving into the real logistics of nurtured heart, is based on 3 principles. 3 stands is what they call them. And the first one is absolutely no. That sounds kind of bad, right? That's not really comfortable. But what that absolutely no means is I will not give myself to your negative energy. I'm just not gonna do it. It's fine, you have it, we all have it sometimes, but that's not where I'm going with you. I'm not gonna walk away, I'm not gonna ignore, but I'm not gonna pour myself into going negative with you. Now, this picture, as I was thinking about absolutely no, I love this picture, and I was like, oh, I know just what to do. This picture from when we were in Siena, and he's like flailing around, and I'm just like, happy. No, I didn't know he was doing that until I took the picture. Let me tell you, I'm sure I energized some negativity in that moment. But the idea is that he can have that moment, and I can say, I will be right here when you're ready. And it's not about me, and it's not about me controlling that moment, right? It's about me finding a way to get myself back to the place that I want to be so I can be in relationship with my child. I think this also has something to do with charitable reading and even taking it a step further, not looking at the deficit. Don't waste yourself on that. It's not that it's not there, and it's not that you want to be kind of a toxically positive person pretending like everything's fine. It's more of a acknowledge and move on. Like, don't dwell there. That's not where God is. I mean, God's everywhere, active in the world, but when you're choosing how to orient yourself, that's just not the best choice, I don't think, but I do it anyway. So absolutely no is about responding and not reacting. I'm sure y'all have talked about that. It's about not giving yourself to the things that are not what you value. In Godly Play, we talk about you check yourself first. That means if a child's being disruptive in the circle, the very first thing you do is say, am I inviting this behavior? And how? And sometimes you're inviting it because every time the child acts up, that's the only time they get you. That's the only time you're connected, right? And with our own children, oh my gosh, I hate it, but it's true. And the more I've been trying to work on this, the more true I can tell it is. It's so easy to point out what's wrong. And we want them to be right, and so we want to make sure they know that they have to say please, and we want to make sure they know that they need to do this, and we're just trying our best to give them what they need, but guess what? It doesn't even work, because the law, that's not what gets us there. It's grace. So absolutely no, not giving my energy. Now, here's where I was very convicted. I went looking for this picture for absolutely no. And I was thinking in the back of my mind, I wonder what I should use for absolutely yes. Because absolutely yes is about relentlessly energizing what goes right. And in my mind, I'm like, do I have any pictures I can use for that? Yes, I had 100,000 pictures I could use for that. On this trip, Robert made friends everywhere he went. He was helpful, he was curious, he was patient, he was joyful. He was persistent and tried to catch a bird for the entire 2 weeks we were there, and then he finally did. Robert was amazing on this trip. And when I was trying to think about what picture to use, I didn't even know. It wasn't even in my mind. That's not what stuck, right? So this is the part that I am definitely not good at and that I'm working on very hard and feels really weird. Both Robert and George have said they hope this phase passes soon. Because it's not natural. It's not natural to us, or some of you maybe it is, but to constantly call out what's going right. I'm going back to France for a second. So, oh, look, I even have a picture. This is where I was. So my junior year in college, I went to France, South France, to study, and I made friends with a girl who was pretty anxious. And I had decided to go visit my friends who were studying at Oxford. And I was like, well, I mean, I don't like this, there's no phones or anything. We just had emailed once, and I didn't even know where they were, except they were in Oxford. And so I'm like, I'm just gonna buy the ticket. I'll go there. It can't be that big. I'll find them. And she was like, oh my gosh, I am so proud of myself for even just coming here. This has been so hard to do everything I needed to do just to get to France. I'm so amazed that you're gonna go on this trip by yourself to Oxford. And honestly, my first thought was repulsion. I really was like, ugh, this is just what you do. You don't walk around being proud of yourself when you do something right. You just do it, and you don't ever, I really had this visceral ugh, And then, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I'm actually kind of impressive, done quite a bit of interesting things. And never, ever once until that moment when I was 21 years old, never, I won awards, I got good grades. I had been a terror in elementary school, turned it around, I was great in middle school. Never, ever had I thought, gosh, isn't it amazing how well I turned out when it started out so rough? Never had I thought, I'm like, this is pretty good. Never. And that really stuck with me. I'm still not good at it. And you don't want to be overly impressed with yourself, but this constant barrage of all we think about is what's going wrong, even if it doesn't feel like it's doing much to you, you're missing out. You're missing out on the time when you are aligned with God. Fundamentally, that's what I would want to measure, right? It's not about money and jobs, all that's fine, left brain, whatever. No, but you just miss out, and our kids miss out. And then we also miss out again because, oh my gosh, how fun was it for me to look at those pictures and think about all of the joy and curiosity and kindness that Robert brought into my life. And that was transformational because, God just keeps working, right? Being with children in that way is transformational, but when you do it intentionally, it's amazing. So that's stand 2. Absolutely yes, energize the positive, relentlessly. That also means your connections are deeper because you're just more connected, and it's exhausting. So I haven't figured that part out yet. Okay. And then the last stand 3, is absolutely clear. So I really had some issues with absolutely clear in the beginning because while I firmly believe clear is kind and that clarity is very helpful, I think I sort of conflated absolutely clear with absolutely no, and it just felt harsh and not really what I wanted to be. But absolutely clear is about who do you want to be? You, the adult, the other person, because I think this is good with adults too, it's not just for children. Who do you want to be in that moment? What is your clarity? What is your truth? What are you trying to live out? And so the law, the rule, a clear rule is a gift, but a clear rule can also change over time. So I think that's an important piece. Absolute clarity is about, if you break the rule, I'm gonna tell you right away. I'm not gonna dance around about it. I'm not gonna be like, oh, I know you were trying so hard. I don't think you had enough to eat. Why don't we just have one more chance? I'm very good at all that. I love a drag it on out kind of Not when he was little, but now. A lot has changed. Absolutely clear is, the rule is, it's time to go to bed. I'm clear about the rule, and now I'm not engaged. It sounds completely counterintuitive. And it's very, very hard. George, is it hard? Very, very hard. Okay. But if you think about the 10 best ways, this is a box of the gift we show the children, the 10 best ways that Jesus summarized as love God, love people. It's good to know when we break those rules. It's good to know that those are rules. But it doesn't have to come with shame and guilt and blame. It can come with, who do we want to be? We want to be people who love God with our whole hearts. And so we're going to reset to who we want to be. And in the context of the parent-child relationship or, children in school, we also know that not energizing the rule breaking, which is the negative, invites them into what we do energize. So it's really important that we're doing that absolute yes. Because if you're not doing the absolute yes, then, they may not care if you're ignoring them. If you're ignoring, this doesn't work. It's about being engaged. So rules are important, but they're not enough to create greatness, which we're calling godness. They might create compliance. They might create safety or a sense of safety. And some of that is necessary sometimes, but they're not going to create godness. We're not trying to get the children to perform. What we want to do is make our default setting less about what's wrong, what's of the world, what's turning away from God, and more towards God. So every time you're absolutely yesing the things that are of God, and again, Nurtured Heart does not talk about it in a God way. I'm adding that piece. Every time you are calling out the aspects of God that you see in that person and orienting them towards that and energizing that, we're working against what we're never going to get completely rid of, which is our default setting of turning to the things that are wrong. But the good news is that through God's grace, it is going to work out, and change is possible. We just can't do it on our own. All right, so the final thing I'll say quickly, and this is about the reset, because this is the thing that people have a lot of questions about. You broke the rule, and now I'm going to not energize the negative, and then what do I do, right? So Howard Glasser talks about it as a video game theory. And he says the reason children, and particularly intense children, love video games, and they do, is because they play and they play and they follow the rules and they follow the rules and the rules are clear. And then if they break a rule, what happens? Restart, right? They get kicked out of where they were, so they have to do some, there's a consequence, but it's minimal. And then they're back in the game and they know how to succeed. They know what they need to do to succeed because the rules are clear and they're ready to try again. So I think it's the same with God. God is always ready for us to re-engage. And to do Nurtured Heart is going to take, for us as a family, for anybody who's trying to do it, we have to acknowledge, we're never going to do it perfectly. We are always having to reset. And I think that it's so hard, actually, to implement Nurtured Heart that there's not a way to do it without God. There's not a way to do it without asking God to come into that moment and help us reset and get back in the game. So that's it. This is just a question. Questions or comments? Well, I'm going to teach a Nurtured Heart class in the fall for adults. For parents. Yeah. Well, and there's lots you can go online and read. There are podcasts. I think it's a really interesting idea. To me, I don't even know what the hardest part is, but a good place to start is to just try to not energize negativity, period. Just see how that goes. It's hard.
Did they talk at all about, so obviously you started this program.
Yeah.
And your son was older.
Yeah.
Was there any advice for how to do that?
When they're older? Yeah, well, I think the biggest piece of advice is like they're not going to like it at first. And I mean, Robert has said, this is stupid. I hate when you nurture my heart. But the other thing is like it's working. So he hates it, but then we've had such a more pleasant, positive experience overall since I've been really trying to do it. So I think, yeah, it's definitely different with older children. We also use this in the preschool where I teach, and so I've been using it with toddlers in that context. And that is just funny and fun because you can just see it really working, but also it's so constant, And it's so constant.
I feel like my biggest fear is in the early childhood phase of parenting. It's such survival mode.
Yeah.
That like this need sounds delightful, and I would give anything to have the bandwidth.
Right.
And there are times where maybe we do, just by default, because we're trying. I have to be very positive. I tend on the side of not so positive.
Yeah.
But you're just so tired. I mean, the word relentless is like touching the iceberg of how tired and relentless.
I hear that 100%. I got my mom to try to do this with her Algebra 3 class. She teaches a math teacher. And she did it with success, but she was like, 1 period a day, but whoa, wears me out. So yeah, I mean, it's really hard. I will say it's like exercising, it's like the more you do it, the easier it is, blah, blah. I think the easier to control your children are without it, maybe the harder it is to do, right? So if your children are completely out of control, then you're like, I'll do anything. I'm already like, whatever. But if they're not, then it's harder. But I would say still valuable, and that the positive, shifting your own view to the absolutely no, I will not energize the negative is very restorative, spiritually and even physically. So it gives you more bandwidth. And that's why that's where you start.
I would say the one piece that they should call in that I'll commend you individually for is leaning on your village.
Yeah.
This morning, Coach George was with me in communion. It was total deficit focus for me. I mean, my 5-year-old was all over the altar, and thankfully George had this wonderful positive attitude. He leaned into, he's all boy, it's great, I love it, and reshifted my focus immediately.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm so blessed. He's healthy, he's happy, he's thriving, he's here. I don't know what he's learning, but I don't need to focus on how he's so poorly behaved, just focus on the good.
Yeah.
So I think that they should add that role of calling in the village for parents.
Yeah.
Community.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yes, I agree with that completely. And I think a piece I didn't really address is how, I know it's time to go, how part of what's so hard is that we are so caught up in our belief that we can control our image and what people think about us, and that our value comes from people thinking we're good parents, that then it's really hard not to go to, I just a few nights ago, Robert was completely out of control, which he rarely is, and I was mortified. And I just yanked him out of there and, and there are ways to set firm boundaries, and he needed a firm boundary right then, and it did not include continuing to do what he was doing. But I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it for me because I was upset. I didn't want people to see my child behaving that way. And that is a reality of our life, and also I would say, an example of our fallen nature. And so just even calling that up and thinking about it can help you in the moment be like, you know.
About the terrible conversation we had about totally stripping your agenda and your expectation from the way you serve. And I have so much an expectation when I serve my children.
Yeah.
That I think I do it for myself.
Yeah.
My own image.
Well, and it's just important to remember it's both and. It is the state of the world, and God can redeem us over and over and over again. So, don't swim around in the fact that you're messing up. Yeah, we all do. I don't know. It's hard, though. All right. How do we end this class? Do we stand up and say the Lord's Prayer? Okay. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank y'all.